Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Just dropping in, just getting myself organized. I just did an interview with the amazing Dr. Joshua Bowen and Dr. Kip Davies. Just really, really cool stuff. It was really interesting. I wish I had them for longer, but I respect their time, so I had them for what I had them for. And but yeah, if I can get them on again, if there's anything I can do to hook up with those guys, sure. Yeah, I'm all in. No, I always find everything they're saying fascinating, and they make me feel like I don't know anything, which is great. I like feeling like I don't know anything because there is so much to learn and so much to do, so much to learn. It's fantastic. Hello, Marty. Hello, Devian. So good to see you. I'm going to jump right into this one. Just sort of, I really want to wrap up the Turek disaster here, and it was a disaster. If you didn't see the first part, I was going to link that actually. Give me 1 second and I will do that to just link people into the part one. There is the first part. I should put it in the description. If I was a better person, I probably would. I'll do that right now. But yeah, it's really good to see you there, Viclet. Really good to see you. Yeah, sorry about that. Shame I had to keep working my listening. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. That is completely understandable. I'll just do part one and drop that in. Hopefully that link works. Why not? Why not? Oh, thank you, Deviant. I really appreciate it. Anytime I know you're an Egyptologist, I would love to have you on as well. Anytime, not a problem at all. I want to do more interviews with people I find fascinating and, have really, in fields that they're really good at. Really, it's just an eternal crusade to make sure everybody knows that I don't know anything, basically. So I'll get people on way more knowledgeable about their fields than me, and then maybe I can secondhand gain some respect from people, vicariously gain some respect by people. Hello, Big Bad Mama. So good to see you. So Frank Turek, yeah, and he's one of the names that sort of came up as sort of professing expert on everything. And I kind of really feel that when talking about Frank Turek, because he kind of makes these very sweeping statements about everything. This video was 3 lies your kids want to believe. So obviously the underlying supposition there, the sort of underlying current is, well, these aren't true, right? These are not true. So number one was I have my own truth. So I feel like Frank, and in the part one, I sort of to summarize sort of what I went through, I feel like it conflates things a lot. Like, I have my own truth. That's rarely talking about objective truths. It's really talking about moral truths or value statements. Like if you say, hey, Jesus is the way, is the truth, and the child says, no, I have my own truth. It's just your own definition of truth. It's not saying that propositions that are true are suddenly not. I think that he's really playing with words there. Love means approval. As I pointed out, love does mean tolerance of people. You don't need to approve, but you do need to tolerate, people's core fundamental beliefs, unless they're hurting others. So I don't, he's sort of trying to say, hey, you can be mean to minorities as much as you want because we don't have to approve of them. Okay, well, you can not approve and not sort of abuse them as well. That's more than reasonable, and not be bigoted towards them. The Bible is a fairy tale, and we're getting onto the Bible is a fairy tale, which I don't know why these are 3 things your kids want to believe. I think he's basically talking a lot about kids going off to college, kids going off to university, and these are things that they often pick up. And I'm not even sure that they do pick up, I have my own truth. I think that isn't something that they pick up from university. It's more just saying, if you claim that Jesus is the truth, they will say, hey, there's that's not my truth. Basically saying, hey, that isn't something that I believe in. I don't think they're actually, I don't think they're talking about actual true propositions there. Love means approval. Well, no, they're not being taught love means approval. They're learning love means tolerance. Like, you tolerate somebody even if they're doing something that you don't think is good for them. But he just wants Christians to be nasty to minorities. So he's sort of saying, hey, this is what kids are taught. And I will say this for Frank, he's a very good public speaker. Look, all things aside, he's very good at public speaking. I just don't think his arguments hold up. These arguments are all based upon sort of very, very different things. Oh, Imran, yeah, exactly. Very good point. Attacking secular values, yes. I'm not even sure that the Bible as a fairy tale is a secular value, though, to be honest with you. That's more an atheist kind of thing. Secular just says, hey, I'm neutral about the whole thing. It doesn't really matter. So basically the Bible is a fairy tale. He's basically saying, hey, no one considers the Bible to be inherently true like they do. I guess that is secular, sure. Like, there's no reason to think that is the case. There's no reason to put that standard into society that the Bible is somehow has any more authority than any other holy book out there, i.e., not much unless you believe it. And no one's stopping you from the Bible having authority over your own life. You get to choose that. That's fine. But, there's no, we don't have to take your Bible as being some sort of special book. If you want to, sure, go for it. Knock yourself out. But don't include us in that. So that's, and going to college, you find things, or going to university. Like if you take a biology course in university, it's very difficult for somebody with a critical mind to go to university, learn how evolution works, learn how, everything works, and then go, well, even Adam were made in the dawn of time with a rib creating, that's what they're talking about. But, of course he sets it up as that's a lie and your kids want to believe it. No. It's just that modern society and what we've revealed about biology, about sort of, the universe, about certain things is in conflict with the Bible in certain ways. And that's okay. A lot of Christians just go, hey, well, the Bible is just being metaphorical. Sure. Yeah, you can believe that. But, Frank's a bit more fundamental than that.
Why? Because if the Bible's a fairy tale, then, again, they're the moral arbiter of their lives. They don't have to bow to God. They get...
No. Nobody's believing that because they want to, be the moral arbiter of their life. Right. And this is something he's set up all throughout it. He sort of said, hey, you just want to create your own morals kind of thing. Number one, we don't create our own morals. For instance, okay, so if I live in this society, if I suddenly decide and want to create my own morals that, hey, it's okay to steal from people, nothing changes. It's still immoral in the society. When you're looking at morals, you're looking over a society. But again, it says in the Bible that if your child is drunk and lazy, you should stone him to death in front of the temple. That is not acceptable as well, right? So we're not creating our own morals and we're not going to God. It is a intersubjective thing. We make up where we want to go, and then we say, what ought we do in order to reach the end goal, to basically have a healthy society? That's essentially what we're doing. That's what sociology does. It sort of says, hey, where can we expect these values in a society to lead us, right? So any society that says, hey, there'll be unrestricted power, for instance, that will lead to corruption. We know it will. So we ought not to do that, to give unrestricted power to people if we want a society that doesn't have corruption. That's how it works. So it's not me making up, just arbitrarily what I want to do. It is saying, hey, this is what I want the end goal to be. What must I do in order to get there? That's basically what we're saying. So, and plus, nobody's sort of disbelieving the Bible in order to make up their own morals anyway. We disbelieve the Bible because of the evidence to the contrary, the evidence against the Exodus, the evidence against, Adam and Eve, the evidence against, the creation story of the world. We're scientifically discovering things and saying, hey, that doesn't match with the Bible. It's not because we want to make, like evolution, for instance. people have described that as evolution, right? Like it's this evil thing. No, it's not evil. It's no more evil than gravity is evil for, causing people to fall and get hurt. Like it's not evil. It's just a process. And parts of it are an inconvenient truth. Parts of it are really horrible. It's not great. Like it's not like we should follow whatever evolution says. It isn't for that. It's just a process of how things change over time, or how living organisms change over time. It isn't good or bad or trying to do anything or trying to hurt us. It just is. It just is a process that has benefits and hindrances. A lot of those hindrances are things like, the aggression left over from survival mechanisms in humans that cause a lot of problems, a lot of wars, a lot of very, very harmful effects in society. Even things like inability to create our own vitamin C, leads to scurvy, leads to these problems. We need fruit in order to not get scurvy. Like it's just a inconvenient leftover from this process. Nobody's saying, hey, we believe evolution because we want our own morals. So Frank's being really disingenuous here. Like if he believes that people just want to make their own morals so they reject a God, I'm really sorry, Frank, you're wrong. Your credibility is crap to me at that point because you're wrong. It's almost in line with the pre-suppers going, well, everyone believes God, you're just suppressing it and you're unrighteous. Nobody's suppressing anything. Like nobody is. It's just you're saying that because your book says it, and it just shows how wrong your book is. No one is doing that. It's a weird, sort of thing to say, hey, your motivation isn't the motivation you say it is. Your motivation is what I deem it to be. No, I mean, who's doing that? We could turn around and say, hey, your motivation for believing in God is just so you're afraid of, not existing, and therefore you're making up heaven. And it's just the same thing.
To do their own thing. Of course, what they forget is the supreme advantage of the Bible being true, and that is you're going to know the God of the universe, the God who created you, and you're going to be in a state of bliss with him and your loved ones who have also accepted the invitation.
Yeah. What about all the people burning in hell there, Frank? What about all of the, your friends from university that really have done nothing wrong? They've been perfectly wonderful people. They've helped you out with assignments. They've comforted you when you're upset. They've been supportive. They have loved ones. They love their boyfriend, and they're planning on having kids and traveling around the country. What about them burning in hell forever because they had the temerity to not accept your Bible stories? What about them, Frank? No, we're not going to talk about them. Yeah, no, I didn't think so. And just the way that he's just assuming this is all 100% true. I mean, he's really playing to his audience, sure, but yeah. Hello, Hill Hugger. So good to see you.
Why wouldn't you want that to be true? But a lot of people don't.
Okay, so why wouldn't you want that to be true? It's not about what I want. Okay, it's not about what I want. The whole idea of I would like this to be true, therefore I'm gonna believe it's true. What's wrong with that picture? Right? What's wrong with that? It's because you will always find reasons for what you want to be true to be true. It's confirmation bias. We understand how this works. But what I want to be true has absolutely no bearing on what is actually true. There will be a God or not be a God. There will be a heaven, not be a heaven, regardless of what I want, right? So a lot of this is teenagers finding out that their Bible isn't inerrant. It isn't this perfect paradigm of what is, and finding out, hey, there's a lot of explanations for stuff that contradicts the Bible. And then questioning their beliefs, deconstructing, which is reducing down to what do you actually know? What is it that you can put together that you can actually reliably know? And then from there, building up a worldview that may not have a God in it. And he's sort of saying, oh, but why wouldn't you want that to be true? A lot of them do want that to be true. But at a certain point, what you want to be true, if the evidence goes against it, you can't support it. And then you have to acknowledge that it's not true, regardless of what you want. I don't understand this. It's this Christian thing that's like, oh, well, don't you want there to be a God? Even if I did want there to be a God, does that make it any more true? No. Come on now.
And what I want to do is spend a little bit of time why we know Jesus rose from the dead. Why? Because if Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity is true. And this is what we point out in the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist book.
Yeah, well, that's silly, because Jesus rising from the dead, it doesn't necessarily mean that Christianity is true. It could be that another God rose him from the dead. It could be that aliens did it. There could be a million reasons. Don't get me wrong. It's good evidence. It's definitely evidence. But I think the whole idea that because a miracle happens, it must have been the Christian God. Yeah, I think that logically that doesn't follow, that it couldn't have been something else. But I will grant it's good evidence for Christianity. It's just the way that he's phrasing it. I don't think that logically follows.
I don't have time to go through all the...
Hey, Robin. Hello, Larry. How you doing? And Tori's in the house. So good to see you, Tori. Imran, Mr. Anti-Idiotic. Okay. Wow, you must have your work cut out for you. Wow.
Argumentation here today. But let me just say this. A lot of people can't believe in a resurrection because they've never seen one. We cover all this in the book. But the resurrection is not the greatest miracle in the Bible. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Yeah, there's a problem there, because we know that the heavens and the earth wasn't created. Like we understand how gravity and accretion disks work. Like that's how sort of things formed. It doesn't need a God. So this is sort of just begging the question. It's just saying, hey, that's a miracle because we say that's how it formed. It was created. Okay, can you demonstrate that? But don't forget, he's not talking to atheists here. He's talking to concerned parents who are worried about their children being deconverted. That's who he's talking to, right? So you've got to understand the context of this. He's in a church. He's been sort of paid to appear. Well, I bet he's been paid to appear. Maybe he did it pro bono. I don't know. But anyway, he's appearing and talking to parents who think their children are going to be taken away from the faith by these horrible scientific people in the institutions, the colleges and the universities. And so he's doing a 3 lies that your children want to believe. And he's sort of giving apologetics to counter them. Well, what's the problem here? The problem is that Turek's a good speaker, but when you actually look at the arguments, they're not very good arguments. Like if you go to your child and say, oh, but look at the first verse, it says that the miracle of everything being created. And they've done, astrophysics where they've found out that, hey, we know all of this stuff because of these evidence-based reasons. That's going to fall flat on its ass. Your kid is going to laugh at you. And that's the problem. I mean, he's kind of self-defeating here, because while he's, doing his stand-up routine, which is why I labeled it that, it feels like a stand-up routine, it's not actually going to convince anybody, because without believing already that, the origin of the heavens and earth, or the universe, is a miracle from God, it's not going to convince you.
That verse is true. Every other verse, including verses about a resurrection, are at least possible. You know the interesting thing, ladies and gentlemen?
If that verse is true, then everything else is at least possible. Okay, so prove it's true.
Interesting thing is that even atheists are admitting the evidence for the first verse. They're saying there was a beginning to the universe. Well,
no, they're not. So atheists, and more importantly, cosmologists, or it's cosmogonists, right? So cosmology is the study of the universe. Cosmogony is the study of the origin of the universe, right? So it's cosmogonists, people that study where the universe came from or how it formed. we're not even certain that there was a beginning to the universe. There's several models, Sean Carroll's Many Worlds, that sort of, they don't have a starting point to the universe, or they're sort of, you know, tied into another thing. So like the whole idea that, oh, atheists think this, even atheists concede there's a beginning. No, we say we don't know where the universe came from, and we don't know if it was in some sort of atemporal state before the Big Bang, because the Big Bang is not the start of the universe. Okay, I'm going to say it for Christians up the back. The Big Bang is not the start of the universe. It is the start of the expansion period of the universe. And we've been through this so many times. And you know, if I hear again that, well, a universe can't come from nothing, I'm probably going to throw up a little. I will admit that. It's just so bad. Hello, Al. Good to see you, mate. So good to see you. Because no one's saying that the Big Bang, like, so the Borg-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, they basically will say, okay, well, the BGV, which is the Borg-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, actually says that the universe had a beginning point, and it doesn't. It says that the expansion had a beginning point, right? That's all it says, that the expansion had a beginning point. Right, so that doesn't mean the entire universe does, and I believe it was Guth himself that came out and said this. Like, he actually did a interview and said it, and they still will misrepresent it. It's wild. So no, atheists aren't saying this. What we're saying is that the furthest we can go back is the expansion, start of the expansion period. It could have been the beginning. We're not saying it's not. We're not saying it is, though. So this is not true. Absolutely not true.
Ladies and gentlemen, if space-time and matter had a beginning out of nothing, what could have caused that?
Okay, I'm going to throw up a little. Yeah, out of nothing. So this conflation is ages old. It just, when Lawrence Krauss basically wrote the book of Universe from Nothing, the nothing he was referring to was a quantum field. It's no matter, no energy, no space, no time. Right, but still there's something there which is a quantum field. He calls it nothing because there's no matter, no energy, nothing like that. So, you know, this is just, again, a book that came out with a pithy title because it needed to sell, and they jump on it, misrepresent everything that he was saying, and then tout, you know, stamp around like they've won something. They haven't. They haven't.
It seems to me only a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause could have caused space, matter, and time to come into existence out of nothing. That sounds a lot like God.
No. Look at all of those assumptions. Spaceless, timeless, immaterial. Really, can you demonstrate this? A personal God, can you demonstrate this at all? Or are you just saying it? It seems like to you. Who cares? Who cares what it seems like to you? Oh, yeah, thousands of religions, and you just happen to stumble into exactly the correct one. It's wild. It's absolutely wild. Like, you know, why should we care what Frank Turek? It seems like. It seems like. Oh, well, that's such ironclad evidence.
Look, if Genesis 1:1 is true, a resurrection like the resurrection of Jesus is possible.
If it's true, and we've got a lot of evidence showing that it isn't. God created the heavens and the earth. That we don't see. We have monitored like planets forming using really, really long-range telescopes, and it seems to be accretion disks and gravity, not a god. Like, this is a thing. We see solar systems in the process of formation, and there's no god hovering over it. It doesn't seem to be necessary. So you've got to show that this God is there. Oh, I do a debate review with Ember every Saturday night Eastern time. This is my segment of Fundamentalist Fails where I go through reviewing, fundamentalist failures, to be honest with you. Let's face it. So yeah, that's a different program, and we switch channels every week, kind of thing. I do apologize. My last debate dissection, which is the other one. I don't know. I like alliteration. Please forgive me. So I actually got a lightning strike just before. Apparently, it was at a substation. My wife told me it was at a substation. So I had to cancel the last debate dissection. I really do apologize. But yeah, it took my power out. Took my power out completely. So I didn't do it last week. But it will be this week in a couple of days, kind of thing. So it's still on, as far as I know. And I'm doing Alex O'Connor on Surrounded with all the people. So yeah, I really liked that. I thought it was good. I really would like to do the what's his name, Sam Cedar on Surrounded as well. That would be cool, because that was some wild stuff on there. Your rear end fell apart. Okay.
The only question we have now is, what evidence do we have that it really did occur? And in the book, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, we have a chapter called The Top 10 Reasons We Know the New Testament Writers Are Telling the Truth. We don't have time for 10. I just want to give you 2. The first reason that I think we know beyond a reasonable doubt is they told the truth is that there's embarrassing stories in there that they never would have invented. You say, what is this about? Look, historians know that if there's something embarrassing to the author or authors in the text, it's probably true. Why? Because you're not going to invent details that embarrass you. You're not going to.
Okay, so let's hold on that for a second. Now, note where he says the embarrassing to the author or authors, right? So he's talking about the New Testament, and more specifically, he's talking about the Gospels. So the question then arises, well, if it's embarrassing to the authors, who are the authors? Who are these people? Because while the church holds historical tradition that they were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we don't know that. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that some of them weren't written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. But there's nothing that confirms their authorship as being the gospel writers, what they're called. That is just traditional. It's been ascribed there. Now, there's don't get me wrong, there's varying levels of certainty with each one of who wrote it. You know, they're fairly certain that Luke wrote Luke, for instance, because of the way it was written. But the other ones are a bit more fuzzy. Oh, hey, Luke, good to see you. Speak of the devil. Speak of the devil, and the Luke appears. Oh, hello. Hello.
Invent details that make you look bad. You might invent things that make you look good, right? But not bad. In fact, let me ask you guys a question. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? Look, if you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good, and it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? You don't do that. You might.
Well, actually, that is something that people have done in the past. You know, like I remember somebody sort of saying at work, if you want to like sell, if you're late and you want to sell a story, tell them you got diarrhea or something. Because, you know, when you're making stuff up, if you make yourself look bad, it's more believable, right? You know what I mean? Like, you know, tell them that you got stuck changing a tire and it was horrible and stuff like that. So, yeah, people have lied in order to make themselves look bad because it lends to the credibility of the story. That's number one. Number two, did the authors make themselves look bad? Because who were the authors, Frank? Who was authoring this? Because, it, you know, in my mind, it is doubtful that it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It very well may not be. And if you are trying to sell a story to your boss, giving, you know, embarrassment is actually more convincing. And people know this.
I'd lie to make yourself look good, but you won't lie to embarrass yourself. Well, the New Testament writers have filled the New Testament with embarrassing stories and details they never would have invented. That's why we call this the dove factor. They're not making this up. Let me just give you a few of them. Peter, their leader, is called Satan by Jesus. you think they invented this? Do you think Peter or Mark, who wrote this down, at one point said to Peter, hey, Pete, I'm going to make...
Yeah, and that's the question. Did Mark write it down? That's the question. Was that written by Mark? Probably not. The authorship of Mark in particular, I think that is pretty well contested. It's traditionally associated to Mark the Evangelist, also known as John Mark. The gospel itself is anonymous, right? And I think it's Mark where he basically refers to Mark, like he refers to Mark the Evangelist, and that is the person who's supposed to be writing it. So unless he's writing in third person, you know, Mark was added to it later on. You know, it's very, very strange that that sort of, you know, this whole thing is just assumed to be written by Mark because they don't know. That is highly contested. Yeah, I don't, you know, I look, it may have been written by Mark. We don't know. That's the question.
This is a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. This doesn't look good. I'm the leader here. And then Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away. And who are the brave ones? The women. That's right. That's right, ladies.
Yeah, and so the problem is that these are written by people sort of recalling events and events that actually happened. So while, you know, it's sort of like when you're recording history, there's certain things you're going to have to include that actually happened. And we don't know this was written by any of the apostles. The same thing holds true. You can say, hey, the gospel writers definitely wouldn't have made themselves look bad. Yeah, assuming that it was one of the apostles that wrote this. That's assuming it was. Well, yeah, I mean, Paul's were the earliest texts, but he doesn't include a lot of stuff in the later ones, you know. Like, for instance, the empty tomb, Paul's are the earliest writings. He doesn't even mention the empty tomb. He said that Jesus rose from the dead. Yes, he does say that. Paul does say that. But at the same time, he doesn't even mention Joseph of Arimathea or the tomb. Look, it's wild. But all of the others have these details in it. It's crazy.
On Father's Day, I am woman, hear me roar. You didn't run away like you sissy pants men did. Now, who wrote the New Testament documents down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews, why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man?
So the women finding the empty tomb, okay, so the whole thing about that, and that's been brought up before, that why would it be the women? Because their testimony was less important. I think he gets to this, so I'll save that for this. But the whole idea that, well, it has to be true because these people wouldn't write that about themselves, again, we don't know that they wrote it. It could have been other people. And sort of, it says that they were sort of afraid of the authorities, the Jewish authorities, but Christianity wasn't really persecuted at this point. So I'm not 100% sure, you know, why they're there. It was because sort of they locked themselves in a room, and suddenly Jesus appeared in the middle of the group. It was a valid explanation could be because it gets them in one place, right? Instead of hiding in these sort of disparate places, they're hiding all together in a locked room. Okay. I'm not sure why they would be doing that. There was nothing sort of, yeah, and that's really what I was getting to. It is the woman's work to anoint the body, yes.
And in here invent that? No, if I was making it up, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I mean, I'd write down, let's see, we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds pretty good, huh?
Yeah, but the problem was these were being written, presumably, less than half a century after the events. So they can't invent things that they know will be known as false, right? So if those guards weren't overpowered and they didn't, do all of this amazing stuff, they can't really write that. Now, the earliest gospel was, I believe it was Matthew, which was still sort of up to, sort of 70 years afterwards, I think. Yeah, the earliest was Matthew. But, we can sort of say, hey, at a bare minimum, it was written like, 70 AD, maybe 60 kind of thing. So there is possibly people who were still alive at this time. Probably not many, but, there is the perchance that, hey, someone may say, hey, that never happened. Like if you're talking, a story that's going around a few decades after the events, there's certain things you can't say, unless you want to be called out as lying, because those events did not happen.
John said, get out. Peter roundhouse kicked him. Thomas said, we'll be back. No doubt. Some of you may get that tomorrow. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say it was Mr. Sissy Pants while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way.
Well, it's because the women are the ones that anoint the body. So if you have somebody going and finding an empty tomb, it has to be because why? The first part about an empty tomb is that the Romans generally wouldn't allow burial rites to be performed on criminals, like local burial rites. They would not allow it to happen because someone who violated the Roman law, basically just criminals, they did not want that. They wanted that extra level of punishment for them that they couldn't follow their customs. Now, there were exceptions. There definitely were exceptions. Like, I believe on a emperor's birthday, they allowed, criminals to be given their burial rights and things like that. But nothing about this suggested that they would allow an exception for Jesus at all. And again, while Paul said that Jesus rose from his grave, he mentions nothing of Joseph of Arimathea, mentions nothing of the empty tomb. And plus, Joseph of Arimathea was supposed to be one of the Sanhedrin. He was supposed to be one of the Jewish priests who was sympathetic to Jesus. But it contradicts the Bible where it says that all the Sanhedrin unanimously convicted and hated Jesus, right? So it does conflict there. And the fact that Paul, in writing to the Corinthians, writing to Romans, does not mention this amazing piece of evidence. They have the killer evidence that the women went to the tomb and found it empty. Number one, had to be the women, couldn't be anybody else. Why would the disciples be at the tomb? There's no reason for them to be. Number two, it's unlikely Jesus even got a tomb, and there's no evidence for Joseph of Arimathea. And Paul does not mention this single thing that is the wonder of all. So we don't know there was a Joseph of Arimathea. We don't know there was a tomb. The fact that Paul doesn't mention it is very telling when he apparently went round and talked to everybody. None of his letters, if he's trying to convince these people of, the truth of Christianity and writes them letters, doesn't even mention this single fact that would be the linchpin of their religion. So much so people are using it today. It's wild. It's absolutely wild. Well, yeah, that's without going into the all the saints rising from their graves and walking around the city. Yeah, that's definitely mythology, I think we can say. But yeah, so the whole idea that, it's these the men were hiding the empty tomb. Dude, you don't know that was embarrassing to the writer, because we don't know who the writers were.
Why would you never say the women were the first witnesses?
And plus, if you're using the criterion of embarrassment, you can say the same thing about Joseph Smith. Like, he destroyed a printing press and was shot in the back as trying to run, and they still, they use the same criterion of embarrassment to show that, hey, this is true, that he was a prophet. Because why would you write down things that are embarrassing?
In that culture. I mean, forget about the fact it was embarrassing to men. It was, but independent of that, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses? Yes, because a woman's testimony in a court of law was not considered on par with that of a man.
Yes, but there's no reason for men to be at a tomb, right? There's no reason, because women did the funeral rites. They did the burial rites. They anointed the bodies. So even if there was a tomb, even if the tomb was empty, it is the women who would discover it, because there's no plausible explanation as to why the men would go down and check on the body. None whatsoever. But there is a reason why women would be there. That's even if the story is true, which I think is a great leap as well. Hello, Victoria. Good to see you.
So you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. And all four gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They were. In fact, one of the women was a formerly demon-possessed woman. Gee, what a credible witness you got there, huh? No, they're not making this up. They would never invent this.
A former demon-possessed woman, yes, but she was also very close to him, and it was usually the closest people, the closest women that did these rites. So I don't know why, what are you supposed to make up? Was just some random woman, maybe a judge in the town or something? Like, what are you talking about? And the whole point there is former demon-possessed, former.
Lady came up to me once. She said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I had not thought of that. Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you.
Well, I'm not sure that's true, because one of the Gospels said that the women told no one. And one of the Gospels said that the women went to the men and told them straight away. So I'm not even sure that the Bible backs that. Yeah, so Mark 16. I'll just look it up, because I'm sure of this. Like, one of the Gospels says, and the women told no one. I'll do KJV. I don't know if that is Turek's book of choice. And they went out quickly and fed from the sepulchre, for they trembled and were amazed. Neither they said anything to any man, for they were afraid. Okay, Frank, they didn't tell anybody, they didn't tell anybody. So yeah, that sort of neuters your point a bit. I think, though, what is it? Luke? Is it Luke? KJV. Yeah. So this is Luke 24. So it's the same incident, right? The Son of Man must be delivered in sinful men, and they remembered his words, and returned from the sepulchre and told all of these things unto the 11. What? And to all the rest. It was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, mother of James, and other women that were with them, which told these things unto the apostles. Right? So in one story, they basically were afraid and told no one, no man, these things. And in the other story, they immediately went and told these things to the remaining disciples. Don't forget that, yes, there's 12 disciples, but Judas, ripped Judas. And they told all of these things unto the apostles, kind of thing. So what now? It's basically a clear contradiction. But, the apologetics they make, oh, it's not a contradiction at all. Oh, yeah, it is. Absolutely. Absolutely.
You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what? Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you. Yeah. The nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days.
I really wonder about Frank's marriage kind of thing. And I'm really sorry. I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but he's sort of talking about how, like, he wakes up with somebody and goes, oh, you again? And he's saying, oh, well, he will never tell you anything. Like, seriously, dude, you've got to start communicating with your wife, mate. Like, seriously.
What's for dinner? He's not going to tell you.
Well, apparently the women in Mark told no one. But in Luke, they told all of the disciples and everybody else. So I don't know how that works. I don't know how that works.
I was at the University of Cincinnati this past November, and some guy came up to me after the presentation. He said, you think that's bad? I know of a friend of mine who was on a plane, just he and a pilot, a private plane, and the pilot died. And this guy didn't know how to fly the plane. So just like in the movies, the tower talked him down. Well, that guy went home that night, and his wife said, how was your day, dear? And he said, same old, same old.
Yeah, and this is what I'm talking about. I mean, he does a good sort of, he's a good speaker. He does his jokes and his stuff, and really doing stand up for the Lord here. But when you actually look at the arguments, they don't hold up to scrutiny. Like when you actually, don't forget, he's talking to a whole bunch of parents who are worried about their children, kind of thing, their children going away to college and learning that the universe wasn't created by some magical dude in the sky. Like, that's what they're worried about. So he's sort of just telling them this stuff. But when you actually look at the arguments, there's problems there. The whole idea that the women would go out and tell everybody. Well, yeah, in one account. In the other account, they tell no one. So how does that work out? And the whole idea of why would the woman discover the body? Because they were the only ones that would interact with a body after its death, because they did the anointing. Oh, hey, Chris, so good to see you, mate. Things are good. Things are good. I just did a fantastic interview. Well, I think it was fantastic. I am biased, admittedly, with Dr. Kip and Dr. Josh Bowen. Just fantastic guys. I love talking to them. I'm annoyed because I only got an hour with them, and that's not their fault. I totally understand they're busy. Their time's precious, but I would have liked to do like 5 hours talking to them. Honestly, I could talk to those guys all day. And I would bug them. They would be so annoyed with me. They'd be like, what with the questions? Bro. Yeah, I know. I find some people just, I've got to bug them with questions. And that's a failing of mine. Oh, that's okay. No problem. No, look, I almost missed it, mate. It was like 7:30 in the morning for me. I almost missed it. It was good, though. It was good. Yeah, and John says there's another one, Simon Peter and the one Jesus loved. So yeah, it's a mess, like this whole story is a mess. And the fact that Paul doesn't mention any of this, right? The guy that is writing people to convince them of the truth of Christianity doesn't mention it at all. That to me is really, it's a problem, because you've got, like, that is supposed to be the major piece of evidence that, shows that Jesus' body rose from the dead. Paul doesn't mention it in the slightest. Hey, Joe. So good to see you, mate. Hey, champ. Oh, I gotta send you an email. I'll hit you up on Discord, Joe. I've got to set up a debate, so I'll hit you up on Discord.
I can't even believe this passage, this verse is in the Bible, but in Matthew 28, when Jesus takes his disciples on the hill in Galilee to give them the Great Commission, this is the climax of the Gospel of Matthew. You know, the part where he says, go therefore, make disciples of all nations. No, he doesn't say make believers. He says make disciples, right? Anyway, as he's giving them the Great Commission, it says of the disciples, this is Matthew 28:17. It says, some believed, but some doubted. What? He's standing resurrected right in front of them. They're doubting? How embarrassing is that? I mean, they're standing there going, see that guy over there? Yeah. That guy over there?
Yeah, well, the problem is that when Jesus returned, he didn't look like, no one could recognize him, which is wild, right? Like, so if you're a omnipotent God who can do anything, and you resurrect your main man, the guy that is supposed to usher in the glorious kingdom of the Lord, why are you giving him are we in a face-off situation? Like, like he's basically looking like Nicolas Cage up there, just going, oh, well, I'm the risen Christ, and no one recognizes him? Why? Like, what is the point of that? I don't, it's so wild that we get told, hey, this was the evidence that God wanted to show, his amazing power because he rose from the dead, and had a face-off? Like he switched faces with somebody? And that's why a lot of people didn't believe him. And who is that embarrassing for exactly? Right? Who is this embarrassing for? The disciples? Well, we don't know the disciples wrote this. This is Matthew. Right? So Matthew, the only evidence that Matthew wrote Matthew was that the early church said he did, that it was attributed to Matthew. That's all.
There's Jesus. Oh, no, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you, it's him. Look, they killed him. I'm telling you, it's him. Do you know what the Romans did to him? They put nails in him all over the place. They put a spear in his side. Blood and water came out, punctured his heart. They whipped him. If the Romans didn't kill him, the Roman soldiers themselves could have been killed for not properly executing. I'm telling you, Jesus is dead. It's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me.
Yeah. I don't know why the most powerful creator of the universe is having problems convincing people. Like that isn't a point in your favor, Frank. That isn't a point in your favor. Like if it was the most powerful creator of the universe being resurrected, people shouldn't be doubting. Yeah, no, I don't think that is actually. I think they sort of speared him in the side, and they sort of say that it punctured his heart. Yeah, so the soldiers pierced his side to assure that he was dead. It's reported blood and water came out. I mean, usually blood and water, it's sort of talking about the lungs rather than so yeah, so blood and water is interpreted as a symbolic representation of the heart of Jesus. So it's not necessarily the case. But look, if that story, like you get pierced in the side kind of thing, whether it's the lungs or the heart, you're probably donezo, like seriously. I would imagine. But it's irrelevant because the only accounts that we have that he actually returned, we don't even know who wrote them. We've got no idea. A lot of it is said, hey, yes, early traditions say it's these people. Sure, but what evidence do we have of that? What actual evidence do we have of that? None. Just the early church. So when he's sort of saying, hey, it was embarrassing for the writers, we don't know that. We've got no idea that that is the case. And I might add that if you are the creator of the universe, powerful in every way, and you come back from the dead, there shouldn't be any confusion over that. The fact that a lot of people just outright didn't believe him, including Thomas, you know, the doubting Thomas. Why was Thomas doubting? Because he didn't look like Jesus, right? He did not recognize him. You're talking about the leader of your religion who you think is the Messiah and spend so much time with, and he doesn't recognize him.
They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus. In Mark chapter 3, it says that Jesus' own family wanted to seize him and take him home because they thought he was out of his mind. They thought he was nuts. That's embarrassing. His own brothers don't believe in him. That's embarrassing too. We learn later, however, that James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote that little book in the New Testament called, man, you guys are sharp this morning. Jack's taught you well. That James, the half-brother of Jesus, actually dies as a martyr as the pastor of the church in Jerusalem in 62 AD, about 29 or so years after the alleged crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. Now, why would he suddenly believe that Jesus is the Messiah, his brother, when before the resurrection he didn't? It said his own brothers didn't believe in him. Well, you know who tells us that James was martyred? It's not in the Bible. It's Josephus, the Jewish historian who was probably in Jerusalem at the time. He lived from about 37 AD to about 100 AD. And Hegesippus, a writer who lived later, they tell us that James dies as a martyr. Why? Well, according to the earliest evidence for the resurrection anywhere, it's actually in a creed in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 to 8. A creed is an early statement that the followers memorized. And Paul just put it in writing in 55 AD to the church of Corinth. But it talks about who Jesus appeared to. And one of
Okay, so James was beheaded by King Herod. He definitely was beheaded. We know that. But whether he was martyred for his faith, right? Like, so do we actually know that he was martyred because of his faith? I don't think we do. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. We know that he was killed, and it could have been because of his religion. We don't know. But so Josephus talks about the unrest that was happening sort of in Rome at the time, leading to the invasion of Jerusalem. So he doesn't actually say that he was martyred, like he was killed for his Christianity kind of thing. He just says that Josephus says that he places his death between two Roman procurators, between Festus and Albinus, and Nero appointed Albinus as the next procurator. It's very strange that it's just sort of automatically a martyrdom because he died and didn't recant his faith, right? So if you are taking that as a standard, like you die and you didn't recant your faith, it means that Joseph Smith and the Church of the Latter-day Saints say Joseph Smith was a martyr. Was he? He was shot trying to escape prison, right? And he didn't recant his faith either. So if somebody dies and they don't recant their faith, does that automatically make them a martyr? No. They have to be executed because, and given the opportunity to recant their faith. And we've got no record of whether James was actually given an opportunity, whether it was his faith that he was being executed. He may have just been a pain in the ass to the Romans. It's possible. Christian persecution did happen after then, but did he get an opportunity to convert or recant his faith? We don't know. Josephus doesn't mention that. So how do we know he was actually martyred? We don't. It's possible, but we don't know for sure.
the people he appeared to was James. So before the resurrection, James didn't believe his brother was God. After the resurrection, he did. You know, before he said, yo, bro, you ain't God. After the resurrection, yo, bro, you're God. Now, how many people in here have a brother? All right, how many people in here have a brother who thinks he's God? Yeah, you don't believe in him either, right? Neither did James until he saw the resurrected Jesus. Then Jesus is called a drunkard.
We don't know that is the case, right? We don't know that is the case. Like, James didn't observe the resurrection. There's no first-hand account from James. We don't know that for sure. You know, James had an epistle, basically. Do we know that was written by James? Not 100% sure. Right, so epistles are letters to people. They're correspondence kind of thing, and the author is identified as James, sort of a servant of God kind of thing. But it was an incredibly common name, like an incredibly common name. So we don't 100% know that it was actually James, the brother of Jesus, basically. We don't know that. It is disputed that sort of, you know, it could have been published under somebody else's name. It could have been a different James. There's nothing in there from the letter that says it was a very common name. So we don't know for sure again. Traditionally, it's been ascribed to James, the brother of Jesus, but we don't know that for sure.
He's called a madman. He's called demon-possessed. You think they invented this? He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, then there are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline, the Messiah's bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Now, do you think that Matthew at one point said to himself, you know what, I think I really need to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let me put a couple of...
Yeah, and the problem is that, again, if this was written very soon or a few decades after the events allegedly occur, there's certain things you can't lie about. Like, you have to put in. You know, if Jesus' ancestry was known and there was prostitutes in there, in order to not be caught out for this, they would have to put in an accurate recording, because there's people that would say, hey, his bloodline wasn't this person, it was that person. You know, like, this is the thing. He's basically saying, hey, because there's anything embarrassing in there whatsoever, it has to be true. All of it has to be true. No, some of it may be true and some of it not true. It doesn't make it all true. And again, people do use embarrassing details to give weight to things that are not true. People reporting late for work because they had diarrhea is a lot more believable than you know, than just something else like that isn't true. Like, you know,
prostitutes in here. Let's see, Rahab. No. In fact, there's a lot of shady people in the Messiah's bloodline. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from, not a good guy. Judah's the guy that sold his brother Joseph into slavery in Egypt. And he slept with Tamar, his daughter-in-law, who's playing a prostitute. And this guy's in the bloodline of the Messiah.
Yeah, but we don't actually think the Jews were held captive in Egypt. That's the thing. Like, all of the Jews, like the whole Moses story, we don't actually think that's true. Mostly because there's no cultural contamination from the Canaanites and Egyptians. Like, there's always overflow. We don't get any. So as far as I know, scholarly consensus sort of says that Canaan, all of the tribes of Canaan and all of the land was sort of in a vassal relationship with Egypt, but they weren't actually over there.
David's in the bloodline. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us then, huh? Bathsheba's in the bloodline. In fact, when Matthew gets to her in the genealogy, he doesn't mention her name, but he still identifies her. What does he say? Uriah's wife. Ooh. He's telling the truth. Who was Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could cover up the crime. Matthew's telling the truth, but it's a slam. You don't find this kind of embarrassing documentation in other histories. You never find this kind of in a pharaoh's genealogy. A pharaoh would chop the head off his history guy if he were to say such things. In fact, you know, Dennis Prager, conservative Jewish.
Yeah, I'm not 100% convinced that is true. There have been historical look at Hercules, for instance. You know, the massive hero of Greek mythology, who was, you know, the greatest man that ever lived in, you know, Greek mythology, because he was the demigod and the son of Zeus. But he was actually born out of wedlock. He was a bastard, basically, because Zeus, I believe he seduced a mortal woman and gave birth to Hercules. He also was a slave for a great period of time. And he had some sort of dubious ancestry kind of thing. Like, this isn't the slam dunk that Frank thinks it is, because there are narratives of sort of mythological figures that are shady, and the whole narrative is overcoming that, you know, sort of Hercules rising out of slavery, overcoming his mother, in sort of his stepmother, Hera, the Greek goddess, wife to Zeus. So she's mad because Zeus cheated on somebody, cheated on her, and so she punishes Hercules. I believe she drives him mad at some point, and that's why he's a slave. Look, there's all of these things that you know, are horrible about Hercules, right? Yeah, he was driven mad by the goddess Hera and killed his wife and children. Looks like Hercules, has to be true, right?
Radio host who believes in the Old Testament says, one of the reasons I believe the Old Testament's true is because nobody would invent such an embarrassing history about themselves.
Who says it's themselves? I don't know why it has to be themselves. Like, I'm pretty sure the Iliad was written by Homer and not Hercules. Like, seriously, what are you talking about?
And I agree with Dennis on that. But I would say to Dennis, if embarrassing testimony and embarrassing stories are evidence for the Old Testament, why aren't they also evidence for the New? They wouldn't have invented this. There's more in the book on this, but we got to move on to our last piece of evidence that.
Yeah, and that's where it'll get you into trouble, because he's sort of saying, hey, parents, if your children are doubting, say this to them. But, you know, the arguments don't hold up. There are mythological figures who were not true, like Hercules, with really horrible backstories. Yeah, no, you're right, Robin. He killed his wife and kids in a rage. And it sort of says, hey, Hera, you know, drove him mad out of revenge for, you know, the Zeus cheating on her. But that's why, I believe that's why he was a slave, and then he had to do the 12 labors of Hercules. A lot of these mythological narratives are a person with an embarrassing or shady or you know, really lowly past, overcoming it and becoming a paragon of virtue. It's a common narrative. So I don't know why Turek is actually appealing to this whole idea of, well, if it's embarrassing to them, it has to be true. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Mythology runs of the overcoming of one's ancestry, one's past, one's deeds, one's problems, to become a paradigm of virtue. Yeah, okay, Thor, he was embarrassed by Utgarda Loki, by his 3 challenges. Yeah, that's right. And that was the ice giant that basically said he's got to wrestle an old woman, and the old woman turned out to be time. Yeah, you'll find this all throughout mythology.
The New Testament writers are telling the truth, and this is called excruciating deaths. And it's important to know that the people who wrote this stuff down, all of them, with the exception of Luke, all of them were Bible, Old Testament believing Jews who thought they were God's chosen people. They already were part of what they believed was the true religion. Luke is the only Gentile. Everyone else is a Jew. Why would they say that a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead? Claiming to be God was blasphemy. Raising from the dead, they didn't expect.
Okay, so if you're going to use that argument, it means that every cult that has ever formed in a religion is true, right? You can say, hey, why would this particular cult come up? They already believed in whatever it was, right? Like this is the problems that you're getting to. Oh, Loki and the horses. Yeah, isn't that where Sleipnir came from? Was Loki doing the dirty? That's wrong. All right, let's just move over that because that isn't that. Look. I don't know if there's kids in the audiences. Don't.
Until the end of time. Why would they say this happened if it really didn't? Why would they invent this? In fact, it's really important to recognize the apostles' beliefs and practices before and after the resurrection.
Yeah, and if that is a category of evidence, then it applies to every single subcult and branch off of every single religion ever. Why would they believe something different if they already believe this thing? Why would they? You know, and here's the thing, like there'll be branch offs from Frank's religion. Like, why would the Church of the Latter-day Saints, why would the Mormons believe all of this stuff with Joseph Smith if they already believed in Christianity? Right? So it has to be true. It has to be true. Because they already had a religion. See how silly this is? Like, this is not a good argument. Because you basically are saying, hey, if they believe something already, a religion wouldn't splinter off and start worshipping a normal guy. Really? That's your argument?
Before the resurrection, they believed in animal sacrifice. They've been slaying lambs to Yahweh for hundreds of years. And they give all that up. They go, we don't need to slay these lambs anymore because these lambs are just symbols of the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Here he is. Christ's sacrifice fulfills that sacrificial system that they've been engaged in for hundreds of years.
Why do you need a sacrificial system for a start? And yeah, religious practices change over time. You can directly apply the Church of the Latter-day Saints. Hey, they had monogamy and then they had polygamy. Why? They had, you know, people in the Levant and then they had people in the Americas. Why? It's a religion, Frank. It doesn't have to make sense.
Before, they believed in a binding law of Moses. Afterwards, they say, no, Christ's life has fulfilled the binding law of Moses. Before, they believed in strict monotheism. Afterwards, they're believing in a Trinity, 3 persons in one divine essence. Yes, you can get the Trinity in the Old Testament, but it's much more pronounced in the New. Before, they believed in the Sabbath. In fact, they thought they could be stoned for not obeying the Sabbath. Afterwards, they're worshiping on Sunday because that's the day he rose. And Paul even says, don't let anyone tell you have to obey any Sabbath or festival day. Before, they believed in a conquering Messiah. Afterwards, a sacrificial Messiah. Now, as you well know, going to church here at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, we recognize that Jesus, when he comes back again, will be conquering, but they didn't anticipate the sacrificial coming initially.
Yeah, so really when the reason why that the Jewish people don't accept Jesus as the Messiah is because, yeah, their prophecy says that he'll come back conquering, right? So Jesus didn't. He didn't conquer Jack. He didn't overthrow anything. And a lot of the sort of prophecy they thought was going to be applied to the Roman Empire, that the Messiah would come back and overthrow the Romans, which didn't happen. So all of this, like just the changes kind of thing, like I don't see why that's evidence that it's true. It's basically pointing to any offshoot of a religion and saying, hey, it changed. It changed practices, it changed traditions, it changed worship days, it just changed. So therefore it must be true. What a ridiculous statement, like seriously. And you know, and the fact that, you know, oh, it was a sacrificial Messiah, that's not points for you, Frank. That's the fact that Jesus did not fulfill the prophecies that the Old Testament makes. And now he's trying to say, oh, but when he comes back again, he's going to be conquering. But they didn't anticipate the death in between. Well, that isn't the prophecy, Frank, for number one. Number two, you know, the original people don't think he's coming back at all.
Before, they believed in circumcision. Afterwards, they believed in baptism and communion. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Let me ask you one other thing.
And things didn't change instantly. Like Frank's trying to make it sound like they had all of these rituals, all of this stuff, and then overnight it just changed. And that isn't what happened at all. It was a gradual change of the church. A lot of splinter groups, a lot of people doing their own thing. It was really Constantine basically laying down what the Bible was that really solidified all of that. And that didn't happen overnight. What was it? The Council of Nicaea? Because there was a lot of different sort of Christians practicing all different stuff. I mean, it's not entirely, like, wasn't entirely, but, you know, the Council of Nicaea basically came about to sort of, you know, settle disputes on theological issues kind of thing. So which ones are, you know, true, which ones are not. And I mean, there's still people that sort of do some of this stuff. There's sort of a Jewish sect which acknowledge Jesus as Messiah. It's wild. So, you know, it depends on which part of the faith that you're in. But Frank's sort of, I mean, he's coming from the point of, well, the true Christians are the evangelicals who do all of this stuff on the right. So I don't know. It's really weird that he thinks that just overnight all of this changed. No, it didn't. It didn't.
Does anybody really believe that somebody would invent a religion where this was their entry fee? Circumcision. You want me to join your club? Yeah, what do I have to do? What? Nobody's inventing this.
Well, number one, that's the Old Testament. And yeah, people can invent stuff like that. I mean, you know, in Muslim countries, female circumcision is still performed. I'm not sure if you're aware of this. Does that mean that it's true? I don't know. Like, seriously, this whole idea that it's true because it's embarrassing or uncomfortable or really shitty, like that, you can't have it both ways. You can't say, hey, this is the religion that has been appointed by the most wise, all-powerful, omniscient creator of the universe, and it's got dumb stuff in it. Like, you can't have it both ways. You can't use it as a point of, well, it shows that the religion is true and it's dumb at the same time. But I don't know how that is.
Now, what would have caused these people to abandon everything on the left and adopt everything on the right virtually overnight and then go die for this?
I don't think it was virtually overnight. Like, I love how he's saying virtually overnight. Yeah, it wasn't that quick. It was a gradual change. And yeah, it was very rapid as far as religions go. But does that mean that I mean, how fast did the Church of the Latter-day Saints spring up? Right? Their worship, their rituals, their things are completely different to mainstream Christianity, right? How fast did that spring up? Oh, why is that? Why is it different? What could possibly have caused them to change? I mean, it's been, what, less than 200 years? That's virtually overnight as well. It doesn't make it more true, Frank.
The only thing I can think of is what psychologists call an impact event. What's an impact event? An impact event is an event that occurs in your life that is so dramatic that it can turn your perspective around 180 degrees just like that. Some impact events are so dramatic that despite the fact you might not remember what you had for breakfast this morning, you'll remember an impact event that happened 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago if you're that old. In fact, there's probably only a few of you here in this room that can remember this or can raise your hand for this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you can remember where you were and what you were doing November 22nd, 1963, hold your hand up and hold it up high. Ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, so impact events are usually traumas, right? They're traumatic events. I will hazard a guess that Frank hasn't really looked up on psychology either, because impact events are usually very traumatic. They're like, you witness, something really horrible. You're in a car crash. Your husband of 30 years does something horrible and cheats on. Impact events are usually traumas that they're talking about. So if you are part of a offshoot religion, you're part of a cult, and you think that your Messiah is going to bring about the kingdom of God on earth in your lifetime, and he dies, yeah, that may be a traumatic event for them. Yes, absolutely. I'm not saying that it couldn't have been sort of the miracle of somebody rising from the grave, but usually when you're talking about impact events, you're usually talking about traumatic experiences, natural disasters, losing your job, losing your spouse, somebody in your family passing away. All of these things can be impact events, but it's usually not something good. In psychology, like he might be using it in a bit of a colloquial way. I don't think he is, though, because he said in psychology this is what it is. I don't know. It's just weird, but yeah. So in a roundabout way, he's sort of showing that, hey, yeah, they can change, because a traumatic event would be your holy leader dying, right? An impact event. The eternal Son of God that is going to bring about the holy kingdom dying, which even he says, oh, it was unexpected. Yeah, damn right it was, because he was supposed to bring about the change they were waiting for. But that is an impact event. It doesn't have any evidence that he is actually some kind of resurrected holy man that has, is the Son of God. That does not speak to it. All it says is that they were very affected by his death. Sure. And his resurrection doesn't have to be. It could have just been his death.
You see these people with their hands up? These people are very old. November 22nd, 1963 is my earliest memory. I was 2 years old and 2 days. Yes, I'm 62 years old now. I know. I don't look a day over 61. In fact, when I turned 50, my wife was very encouraging. She said, honey, you're going to live to be 100. I said, how do you know? She said, because you look half dead already.
Yeah, I'm really worrying about Frank's marriage. That just seems downright abusive. I think he just does this shtick for his shows, like if your wife's really talking to you like that, maybe counseling or something would be a good idea. I don't know. Like, this is the thing. This is what I mean when I say it's almost like stand-up, right? That Frank Turek, he's sort of a B-grade stand-up comedian, because this really feels like a stand-up segment from a comedian from like the 80s, like the sort of, oh, my wife hates me kind of thing. So I don't know how much of this is actually real. My wife hates me and says that I look half dead. Or it's time to update your material, Frank. Seriously, mate.
Anyway, November 22nd, 1963, I'm a toddler. I'm standing in our home in Wanamass, New Jersey, and my mother is on an ottoman, sitting on an ottoman in front of a black and white TV, weeping uncontrollably. Mommy, what's the matter? What's the matter? They killed the president. They killed the president. President Kennedy assassinated that day. I can still see my mother right now in my mind, sitting on that ottoman when she was 26 years old. She's 86 right now. But I can see her when she was 26. I never saw my mom cry like that. That's my earliest memory. It was an impact event. I don't remember.
Yeah, so that must mean that JFK was the Son of God, right? I
remember anything before that and very little after that. Where were you when the second plane hit the tower? I was at my home in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I had the TV on behind me. I had seen that the first tower had been hit. I didn't know by what. And I was talking to a pastor on the north side of Charlotte, and we were talking about what the topic would be if I came to his church. And I said, do you have the TV on? He said, yeah. And so we're talking, and suddenly he screams into the phone. He goes, the second tower just got hit. I turned around, looked at the TV. The second tower is on fire. I said, was it a Cessna? He goes, no. It was like a big plane. It was a United plane. It flew right in there and exploded. I said, you saw that? He goes, it was just on live TV. I said, look, let me call you back. Hung up the phone. For some reason that morning I had CNN on, the communist news network. And I'm not making this up, but the commentator on CNN said this: one has to think there's some sort of navigational error here. Navigational error? You dimwit. This is the clearest day in the history of the Big Apple. What do you think, the pilots can't see where they're going? You think Stevie Wonder's flying these planes? I mean, come on.
Yeah, so Frank's inadvertently sort of making a good point that people affected by impact events, reactions vary vastly. Some people are in denial, like the CNN guy, and saying, hey, it can't have been an attack on the United States. I remember where I was. I'm not going to tell you where I was because I was doing something that was probably, okay. I definitely was in bed with somebody at that point in time. But look, it's not my fault. That's just where I was. Look, the whole point is that people will, oh, thank you, Ryan. Thank you so much. Rian, cultastic, absolutely cultastic. I love seeing her on the damn show, the Daily Atheist Morning Show. Fantastic show. Let me get a link for you because, damn it, I feel like it. Fantastic. A goddess. Wow. Okay. I didn't even know. Have a good night yourself. Good night, good night, good night. A goddess. There you go. But people have different reactions to this stuff. Some people are in denial, like this couldn't possibly have happened. Some people are angry. Like we all go through these. I mean, there's kind of the stages of grief, but these reactions can be vastly different.
This is terrorism. I called that pastor the next day. I said, we're going to come to your church and talk about Islam because that's what this is related to. Now, 9/11 was...
Oh, they were martyred. Their beliefs must have been true. I don't see how the disciples getting an impact event in any way points to the story being true, that Jesus rose from the dead. It doesn't get you there. It just means that they had a traumatic event. That's all. And we can easily imagine if losing your job is a traumatic event, then if you are one of the favored disciples in a upcoming new religious offshoot, which is a bit like a doomsday cult, if we'll be fair, that, Jesus was, hey, the world is ending and in a certain time before some of you have tasted death. That person dying would be a shock. Yes, that would be an impact event. Absolutely.
It's over 22 years ago. But if I would ask you where you were, if you're old enough, you're going to go, yeah, I remember something about that day. But if I would ask you where you were 22 days ago, most of you are going to go, I don't know, let me look at my iPhone. What was I doing that day? Why can you remember something from 22 years ago, but not 22 days ago? No impact event 22 days ago, impact event 22 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, do you think a resurrection would have been an impact event? Do you think if Jesus really did walk out of that tomb and then did miracles over 40 days with them, that they would have remembered that?
Who, Frank? Who wrote these Gospels? We don't know. That's the problem. Like you're automatically assuming that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you don't know that. And no, like even the best historians. Okay, Spielcab, so good to see you. See you next time, buddy. Even the best historians cannot pin that down. All we know is that the early church attributed it to those apostles.
Would they have any trouble remembering that? That's the only way I can think of why they would have abandoned everything on the left and adopted everything on the right virtually overnight. How did they go from scared, scattered, skeptical disciples to the most effective, peaceful, evangelical missionary force in the history of the world? Because an impact event occurred. In fact, what did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they get? Well,
they got a religion. The whole idea that so we don't know who wrote those Gospels. If it was early church fathers, then they get a position of power. They get a lot of power because the Sanhedrin just wouldn't let the early church fathers in and basically be part of their merry little club. And so It'd be like saying, well, what would Joseph Smith have to gain by making up that he had these golden plates and saw the angel Moroni? What would he have to gain? A lot, as it turns out. And I think sort of Frank's going, well, they've got nothing to gain except a lot of power, a lot of prestige, a lot of worship, a lot of adulation. Like it's weird. It's weird to say that, oh, people that make up a religion have nothing to gain. Really? Really? Have you seen Scientology lately? Wow.
Kicked out of the synagogue, then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. We're going to start a new religion. We are?
No. Actually, Christianity wasn't persecuted in the early stages. I was surprised to find this out myself. I was researching, and Christianity, the Romans basically just accepted it as another religion. It wasn't until later that they were actually persecuted. The original founders of the religion weren't persecuted that much because the Romans just didn't care. They just didn't care. So they weren't persecuted, at the very early stages of it. It was only about sort of 200 to 300 years later that it was actually persecuted. Because the Romans didn't really give a crap. Yeah, I mean, okay, so Nero was known for persecuting Christians after the Great Fire in Rome at 64 CE, but the nature and extent of this persecution are debated. And it was only with Emperor Decius, which was 249 to 251, there was widespread persecution of Christians. So we're talking sort of 250 years afterwards. And the whole point is it would have to be empire-wide kind of thing. So, the whole deal that all Christians were persecuted, like immediately after Christianity started, isn't actually true. Although there definitely were persecutions afterwards. Like, there's no doubt about that. But we're talking about persecuting people that didn't live in Rome, but on the outer fringes of Rome.
Yeah, what's he going to get? Supposed to get kicked out of the synagogue, then get beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up. What a great idea. Why haven't we thought of this earlier? No. In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. Now, I get a question a lot sometimes. People will say, well, are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yeah, there are. They're all in chapter 9 of I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. But that question often has an illicit assumption underneath it. What's the illicit assumption? The illicit assumption is, you really can't trust the New Testament writers because you see, these people were biased.
Okay, so, and also Jews were persecuted as well. So this is the thing. There was, in fact, a Jewish-Roman war. I think it was like about 100 years after like the death of Jesus kind of thing. So the idea that they're like, oh, well, let's be Christians. We've got nothing to gain and we've got everything to lose. Jews were already being persecuted by the Romans. That's the thing. Like, you have to, he's saying, oh, well, they wouldn't have changed because the Romans would have left them alone if they were Jewish. No, they didn't leave them alone. They didn't leave them alone. That's the whole point. Like, you're sort of saying, hey, they would have lost so much by converting. Not if they were being persecuted already. Not if they were being persecuted as Jewish people. They wouldn't be losing anything. They'd just be a part of a different religion being persecuted.
You can only trust the non-Christian sources to figure out what really happened. Now, if you think about that for more than 10 seconds, you realize how stupid that assumption is.
Well, it's not that we only trust the non-Christian sources. It's just that we don't know who wrote them. Like, we don't know who wrote them. It's not a matter of trusting the source. Like, we don't trust the Christian sources. We don't know who the Christian sources were to trust or distrust. That's the problem. And the other problem is that we know that the early church, there's something called interpolation. It's basically the early church adding stuff to it. We know this in one of the chapters of Mark. I believe it's Mark 16. Some of the passages in there, the later passages, it's called the long ending of Mark. It was added. It was literally put in by the church. And we have evidence of this all over, where the church has added things to documents, to the Bible, to other places. It's really wild to say, hey, you're not trusting this because it's Christian. No, we're not trusting it because it's A, anonymous, and B, we know that there's been additions to it. That's why we're not trusting it.
Yes. What did these people have to gain by saying it was true? They had everything to lose by saying it was true.
No, not true. Like with any religion, you get a lot of power, you get a lot of adulation, you get a lot, like, I don't think he understands how religion works. Don't you have tithes or something in that church where you stand right now? Do you think that they didn't get donations and people wanting to help the cause? It's wild that he thinks that, oh, well, if you just created a religion back in the day, there was no reason for it and you wouldn't get anything. Really? Really? So how did the church support itself? Was it God supporting it? Or was it people supporting it? Wild.
They're not inventing this. In fact, some of you may know my friend J. Warner Wallace.
Who? Who isn't not inventing it? Because we don't know who wrote the Gospels. Sir, who wrote these things? They're not inventing this. Who? The early church? They invented some things and put them in the Bible, Frank. We know they did invent stuff. So what? Like, and we don't know who wrote them to see who they is, who would or would not invent it.
Cold case homicide detective who's been here at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, speaking with me and also speaking individually. He doesn't live far from here. And Jim is...
And we hear this rhetoric, actually, with the flat earthers. Like, why would I just say this stuff? Because all that happens to me is people laugh at me and persecute me and don't take me seriously. If this wasn't true, why would I invent it? Because you're part of a pseudo-religion that absolutely believes it and their sort of life has been based around it. That's the thing. Like, just because somebody, you know, what then flat earth must be true, because there's no reason they would invent that. And why did they believe it?
It's a cold case homicide detective that's been on Dateline more than any other homicide detective because he solves murders decades old. He also has a website called coldcasechristianity.com where he takes his detective skills and applies them to the greatest homicide of all time.
Oh, this is awful. This is absolutely awful, like the cold case detective kind of thing. Like, seriously? This is terrible, because a detective would, like, if somebody had went to a judge and said, can I get a warrant for the arrest of X person because there's a book that says they did it? No. Like, there would be nothing that holds up.
And so it's well worth checking him out. Anyway, Jim says whenever he finds a body that he knows has been murdered, he says, I don't need to track down 1,000 different possible motivations for that guy being dead. He says that guy was murdered for one or more of these three reasons. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power are the three great motivators that can drive people to murder.
Yeah, and Jesus was causing a lot of problems for the Sanhedrin, which were the Jewish priests and sort of, I guess they were the community leaders at the time. He was causing a lot, according to the stories, he was causing a lot of problems with them. So, you know, how does that even get at whether he rose from the dead? I don't understand. I don't get it.
By the way, they're the same three motivators that can drive any of us to sin. Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things. In fact, they're so good, we'll often take shortcuts to get them. And so Jim says, if you're going to say that the New Testament writers invented this whole story, you got to find one or more of those three motivators to make this plausible. All right, let's take a look at the three motivators. Ladies and gentlemen, did the New Testament writers suddenly get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No, they didn't get sex. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers.
Yeah, but they wouldn't have to work, right? They were just going around proselytizing. They were essentially getting a free ride for simply saying that they're the priests of this thing. Like, why did the Sanhedrin do what they did? Well, because they basically got supported by the community, and they had a lot of power over telling people what to do and how to do it.
Did they get power? No,
Yes.
they got the opposite. They got persecuted. Paul had power when he was persecuting the church. As soon as he becomes a Christian, he's the one persecuted. They didn't get sex. They didn't get money. They didn't get power. There's no motivation to.
So I take issue with that power thing, because they did have power over a lot of people. You cannot have it both ways, Frank. You can't say, hey, they ushered in the greatest proselytizers and preachers that the world has ever seen, and that they had no power whatsoever. Like, you can't have it both ways. You can't have this person being a proselytizer of the greatest, that everybody listened to them, and he converted so many people, but he had no power. No, you can't have it both ways. He either was powerless or he had the power to convert people. Right? They're one or the two. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, hey, they were powerful, beyond measure because they could convert people and they did so much and they were the best, the most incredible evangelists known to mankind, and they had no power. No, that does not make any sense whatsoever.
To make this up. And then why would they go die for a known lie? You might say,
okay, so the apostles, we don't know that any of them were martyred. Again, it's only early church tradition that says they were martyred. Now, in James, it writes about the epistle. It writes about James, who was supposedly martyred, but his extra biblical source doesn't say he was martyred. It just says he was killed, and he could have been, but we don't know that for sure. That's the problem. Again, it's this idea that, because the early church fathers said it, it is true. Who else was martyred? I think it was Peter that was stabbed in Africa. Was that because of his faith? We don't know. We have no idea. It could have been his faith. He could have grabbed somebody. He could have stolen something. We don't know. But he just assumes, because it's much like Joseph Smith, who was shot trying to escape prison, right? And the Latter-day Saints say he was martyred. He was martyred. He died for his faith. Well, that's one way of looking at it. The other way is that he was trying to escape prison and was shot. That's the other way to look at it. Or, Peter was insulting people on the street and was stabbed. We don't know that they were martyred.
Wait a minute, Frank, time out. If you're going to say that Christianity is true because of martyrdom, don't you have to say that Islam is true as well? No, why? Because there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times. But let me just give you one difference for our purposes here. The Muslim martyrs of today haven't witnessed anything that tells them that Islam is true. They just have faith. The New Testament writers, on the other hand, witnessed Jesus.
Did they? We don't know that. You're just assuming that they did, because those accounts that you love to lean so heavily on, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we don't know that was written by those people. So they could have been written by somebody else, and they could have made up that they were martyred, and just that was the tradition. Anybody that died while still believing in Jesus in another country was martyred. If they went out and preached and did that kind of stuff and they were killed, they were martyred. Really? Did they have an opportunity to deconvert? Were they told, hey, if you don't deconvert, well, we don't know. We don't know. So all of this is just, and let's not forget that there's a lot of interpolation. There's a lot of stories made up by the early church and inserted into text as if they were true. That's why interpolation is an actual word.
From the dead. They saw Jesus. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. Many people will die for a lie they think is the truth. No one will die for a lie they know is a lie.
And that brings it up. Did they know it was a lie? If we're talking about an impact event, and Frank brings up himself, like an impact event like the Two Towers, like 9/11, and those planes hit, the news anchor was obviously in denial of what was happening. Yeah, And you can be in denial for a long time. And they may have had a traumatic experience when their immortal holy leader kicked the bucket. So how do you get around that when your immortal, ever-living cult leader shuffles off this mortal coil? Well, you make shit up. You basically say, hey, he's going to come back because he promised us that we would have the kingdom of God. So he's coming back any day now. Any day he'll be back. Let's go out and tell the good story that he's going to return. He's absolutely going to return, and he's going to do this even before some of us die. And so they go out and they preach it, that his return is imminent. 2,000 years later, you're still preaching his return is imminent. It's ridiculous.
And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was...
Okay, Deviant, take care. Say hello to Soot for me. Take it and accept it. Yeah, I don't know. I felt good about it, but part of it, I was sort of flustered a bit. I didn't get to so much stuff, but that's okay. That's all right.
The lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence than that unless you were there yourself.
Unless you were there yourself? No, you can get way better evidence than that, Frank. You can get like an extra biblical source, something that wasn't the people who were in the religion saying, hey, this actually happened. Unfortunately, nobody wrote that down. Nobody recorded that. That doesn't mean it happened.
Now, last thing I'm going to say on this is going to sound like heresy for those of you who believe, as I do, that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, but it's not. Just
yeah, the inerrant. He's an inerrancy guy. So nothing in the Bible can be untrue. That's really worrying. That's really worrying.
With me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true.
Okay, so why bring all that shit up, Frank? Why talk about it so much? If your linchpin is the Bible and all these narratives. So tell me, Frank, let's just ignore everything that he said. So I can't help but feel this is a caveat to, yeah, I know I had really poor arguments that are unsupported by any real evidence. We have to assume that these things are true and that the early church fathers were actually telling the truth about the burgeoning religion that they were in charge of. Okay, so ignore all of that. Why is it true, Frank? Why is it true?
In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. Say, how can that be?
How do you know that, Frank? It would be true if the Bible never existed. Well, yeah, that's right. But it would be false even if the Bible existed as well. This is the thing. He's going from, I think he's feeling out an ontology, whether the actuality, whether this resurrection actually happened. And yes, the ontology, whether it actually happened, is irrelevant of what people believe, of what people know, of what is claimed. It's irrelevant what they do. The ontology, the actuality of the event is independent from that. But we don't have access to that. So what we've got to use is epistemology. It's our methodology, our system in figuring out whether we should believe it or not, or whether we know it happened or not, right? So we've got to separate those two things. So he's saying, hey, yeah, there's an actuality there that's independent of what you believe. Yes, I agree. There's a actuality that my coffee cup is in my hand, independent of what anyone believes about it, right? It doesn't matter what you believe. The actuality is there. But when I go, well, why you should believe it? Because I just held it up. Because I have a coffee every morning when I'm doing these insane rants. Because of all of these reasons, that's all you've got access to, right? You can't tell the actuality. You don't have direct line of evidence to that. You can't just pluck that out. You have to have reasons for believing that. So he's going from the reasons to the actuality behind it, which, I mean, he hasn't crossed a line yet, but I feel like a category error is incoming. He's going to try and say, oh, but it actually happened regardless of the evidence that you have. Well, no. The reason why we believe what it is is hinged upon the evidence, not the actuality of it, because we don't have access to that, Frank.
Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line in the New Testament was ever written? Why?
Yeah.
Because they didn't read about it in a book. They witnessed a resurrected Jesus themselves.
What? No, not all of no. What are you talking about? They witnessed a resurrected Jesus themselves. No, Paul says there was 500 witnesses. He says there's thousands of them. They all witnessed it. No, even Paul with his, was it 500? Were Paul and the 500 witnesses? Yeah, Jesus appeared before 500 witnesses. Yeah. Like, do we know that that's true? No. No, we don't have a single corroboration from any of those witnesses, like any of them. None of them. So we don't know that that is true. We have a claim that 500 people saw the risen Jesus. We don't know that's true. And plus, Paul said some of them have died, kind of thing. Like he actually said, oh, some of them died, so you can't talk to them. Who are they? Are they reliable? Do they hold a position within the church? We don't know. We have no idea.
Then they later wrote it down. Now, thankfully, they wrote it down so we could know.
No, they wrote it down. Was Paul wrote it down. They didn't write anything down. Those 500 people, not the thousands that you claim, didn't write anything down, Frank. One guy wrote down 500 people saw it. They didn't write jack. Wow. Okay. No, Frank, this is terrible. This is terrible.
About it and orient our lives according to it, but it would have been true if they never wrote it down, because Christianity did not start with a book. Christianity started with an event, the resurrection.
Well, it started with a story of a resurrection, yes. You're assuming the story is true. And the funny thing is that Christianity was very splintered at that point, which is why Constantine sort of had to pull back all of the Christians together under one tent, because they were splintering all over the place. So this whole thing about everybody being on the same page, I'm not 100% sure will fly, Frank. I really don't think so.
In fact, we could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers.
Okay. So Joseph Smith didn't create the angel Moroni. The angel Moroni created Joseph Smith's prophecies. This is the stupidity of that, right? This is the silliness of it. You can do that with anything, Muhammad didn't create the Quran. The Quran created Muhammad. Muhammad didn't create Allah. Allah created Muhammad. You can do that with any religion at all. This is just semantics. It's word games. All it is word games. And I'm trying to think. There's definitely a fallacy in here somewhere. I'm trying to pin down exactly what it is. It's almost like affirming the consequent. It's almost like affirming the consequent. I'm not 100% sure which fallacy it is, but it's almost like the New Testament writers did not create who were the New Testament writers for a start? We don't know. The only one that we know who wrote something in the New Testament was Paul, because the epistles were definitely letters written by him. It was Paul. And he didn't witness any risen Christ. He heard a voice and saw a light. That's it. He wasn't there for the resurrection. He didn't see any resurrection. He just said, hey, a light appeared to me and I'm one of the chosen people. This could be applied to literally any cult, any religion, anything at all. It's really not a valid argument at all.
You wouldn't have these documents written down by Jews in the 1st century claiming a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead, unless a man really did claim to be God and really did rise from the dead.
Oh yeah, somebody wouldn't write down that the angel Moroni gave them golden plates unless it really did give. No, we do not look at history like that, Frank. Cults splinter off, religions splinter off all the time. And Left-Handed Jedi for $5. Thank you, my favorite Jedi. Except maybe Obi-Wan. Yeah, it's close. It's close though. If we lost all our tech and books and religion, we'll rediscover technology, but not necessarily religion. Correct. You would need another resurrection with, I don't know, Shmeezus. Jesus would have to resurrect again for that to be written again. It would be different details kind of thing. So yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, we would have different. And that's sort of, things that are objective, the more we investigate, the more people align on them, right? So that's what I've noticed with objectively real or objectively existent things. Like if you have germs, for instance, or some of this thing, the more we investigate, the more researchers will start to align on what is objectively true. Subjective things is the opposite. The more it's investigated, the more they splinter off. Subjective things, you'll get schisms between people thinking that Obi-Wan's the best Jedi, and other ones saying that Left-Handed Jedi is the best Jedi. You'll get this splintering off of subjective things. The objectivity of people investigating and coming to the same conclusion just isn't there with religion. I don't know how better else to put it. So yeah, I totally agree with that sentiment. That as we go along, we should see them converging on agreement to what's objectively true if they do have a reliable research method. And that's what we see. Even you could wipe all of science. You could wipe out astrophysics. You could wipe out computer science. You could wipe out absolutely everything. Over enough time, we would have exactly the same stuff back. Exactly. Well, maybe not exactly. Maybe we would discover some new things and things like that. Maybe we wouldn't discover others, but essentially that knowledge would be built up because it is based upon what is objectively true. And only what is objectively true. And, 10,000 years from now, electricity is going to work the same as electricity always has. You're going to have a capacitor work the same as a capacitor already has. It's going to be objectively works like that. Not the same with religion. Can you imagine what Christianity would look like in 10,000 years? Holy moly. All I can hope is that religion isn't around in 10,000 years because I don't want to see that.
Right.
Yeah, that is not clap-worthy. You could apply that to any statement of faith because you've got to believe it. So Frank's kind of putting the cart before the horse. He's basically saying, well, the event is true, and then we find, reasons to believe it. No, that is not how that works, Frank.
So, the 3 lies. I have my own truth, self-defeating. Does love mean?
Yeah, I don't know anybody that says I have my own truth. Usually that's used in a moral context when you say, hey, Jesus is the truth, and they say this, and it's like, yeah, I have my own truths that I live by. They're really talking about moral truths. So that's just a conflation of what you mean by truth. And it's only in response to that idea that people go, well, Jesus is the truth. Like it is truth personified. No. Truth is just a comparator between two things, a proposition, which is what you articulate as a description, and something else. Like, for instance, there'll be a stone there and you say there is no stone. That is false. But the falsity of it is a comparison between two things. So usually what we're talking about when saying what is true is things that exist in reality, what actually exists. So is it true that, Superman flies through the air? No, No, like when you get down to it, that's not true. Conceptually, that's true, right? That conceptually, in the imagination, Superman can do all kinds of things, but it's not true as in like in actuality, in reality. So we've got to make that distinction. And you don't have your own truth in reality, but your perspective is there. Yeah, and Robin, it always annoys me. They kind of talk like it's a thing, you know, like a chair that is there, you know, like it's something that they have, and it's like no, it's just a state of being where your proposition has matched something that you've compared it to. Like it's not an actual thing. But I'm a nominalist. I think these universals like truth and logic and all of this, or the laws of logic, are just descriptions kind of thing. Love means approval.
Approval? No, it doesn't mean approval. Love means seeking what's best, and that means sometimes you disapprove.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. That's the thing. I don't think anyone's arguing that love means approval. I think he's just sort of trying to counter, oh, well, you know, Christians say they love everybody and then they're bigoted and horrible towards people. Yeah, they are. You know, I don't think somebody I don't approve of, I probably wouldn't love, you know, like if I don't approve of their actions. Maybe. But I mean, there's something to be said that love is about tolerance, because people that I love, I will tolerate things that, you know, I don't particularly, you know, they don't violate my boundaries, but I don't particularly enjoy them. You know, I tolerate my wife's ridiculous obsession with Apple products. It's ridiculous. I tolerate it. I don't approve. I tolerate it. It's madness. It's madness. There's a madness cast over my wife that is incurable. It's incurable. And I blame Steve Jobs, quite frankly. Look, she loves Apple products. I hate Apple products. Seriously, I get why people buy them. They're easy, straight out of the box. They don't require any configuration. They're great for beginners in computing. I'm not a beginner. I hate them because I can't customize them. I can't change them. Hell, I can't even open them up and replace their RAM. That annoys me a lot. So I tolerate her love of Apple products. I do not approve. All right. So love. but I don't. Oh yeah, that would allow them to hate on. Yeah, and so we get this sort of move towards toxic empathy now. Like empathy is bad. You know, being nice to people is bad. Really, that's the Christian way now. Okay, well. No, I don't think that's the case. That's traditionally what marriage is known as. But so marriage at the moment, like I don't own my wife, nor does she own me. And I think that in modern times, like there's no property rights. You're not allowed to sell your wife, tell your wife what to do, strike your wife. None of that is acceptable. So all marriage is in the modern day is a legal acknowledgement by the state that you are in fact in a monogamous relationship with another person. That's all. That's all it is. The only reason Lynn and I got married was because we found out certain legal things we would have more control over where it comes to each other, like, for instance, being able to go into a hospital room and things like that, being able to speak for your spouse in the event of, you know, some problem or things like that. So it was just basically convenient for us because we have more legal rights than we would otherwise. Depends where you live. I don't know. Yeah, here, not in the UK. Okay. Marriage. No, I look. I still love Spaceballs, where the priest is like, "I'm trying to conduct a wedding, which has nothing to do with love." It's just it's so good, so good. Spaceballs. That was funny. The priest is like, he's like, oh, you know, talking about, oh, but shouldn't a marriage be about love? Look, I'm trying to conduct a wedding here, which has nothing to do with love. the Bible is a fairy tale. Yeah, well, I think the Bible is mythology. I think it's highly mythologized. What's the difference between a fairy tale and mythology? Mythology usually has more of a grounding in real places. So it has more of a grounding in, so ancient Greek mythology, for instance. There is a place of Sparta and Crete and, Athens and Thebes and all these city-states. There were places, there were possibly kings as well that were actually, Agamemnon, we're barely certain actually existed. There's all these things which is actually rooted in some kind of historical basis. However, fairy tales we know is made up, right? We know that, hey, the land that Sleeping Beauty was in didn't exist. It's just a fairy tale. It really is just essentially made up whole cloth. But that's not to say that everything in mythology is real. And I think the Bible is mythology rather than fairy tale. It is fictional events placed in historical context is what I think of it, rather than fairy tale, which is fictional works completely made up in no historical context, just in order to give. I mean, fables are kind of similar. They're kind of, Christians call them parables, but they're fables. They're made up in order to convey some kind of moral message, like Aesop's fables and the talking donkey in the Bible kind of thing. So yeah, I may say fairy tale to annoy the Christians, but I don't really think of them as fairy tales, but I do think of them as mythology, which may have historical context to it, but is still fictional accounts.
And the Bible is a fairy tale? No, you got to have a lot more faith to be an atheist than you do to be a Christian.
How so? How so, Frank? This is the worst thing Frank's ever come up with, and he keeps mentioning it over and over. Like, the whole point about being skeptical of people's claims, and don't forget, Frank's skeptical of every religious claim except his own, is that you don't believe this stuff based upon faith. We want evidence for it before we believe it. That's the whole point. But your evidence is terrible. Absolutely terrible. I know he thinks it sits pithy, but it's absolutely terrible, because we could say, well, you don't have enough faith, you have more faith not being a Muslim. You have more faith not being a Scientologist. I don't have enough faith to be a Christian and not a Scientologist. It's terrible, terrible argument.
Because the evidence for Christianity is quite strong. In fact, there's much more evidence in the books. So, Father, since it is Father's Day, if you want to prevent this, Dad, I don't believe in God anymore.
If you want to prevent this, don't give Frank Turek's arguments. Because look, he is a showman. It sounds good when he's up on stage cracking jokes and saying this stuff, but then they will go home and use it. And what happens? What actually happens? Oh, there was embarrassing things for the apostles in there, so it has to be true. But who wrote them, Frank? Was it the apostles? So it wasn't embarrassing for the authors because we don't know who the authors are. And then if you say to them, no, we do know who the authors are, it's definitely Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then, they find out, hey, that's traditionally who it's associated with, but we don't know that for sure. How's that going to end up? This is the thing. He really does sabotage his own, like what he wants to accomplish. It's terrible.
You've got to be really deliberate. Who's discipling your kids? If it's not you, I can tell you who is. This is. Your kid gets a lot more screen time than they do here at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, and probably more time than you talk to them in a given week.
Oh, yeah, don't let them find out about the outside world. Yeah, that's not cult-like behavior at all. Don't let your kids find out there's people that don't believe in Jesus. Oh, no, what are you going to do?
You've got to have a really strong counterbalance to this. In fact, if your kid's 16 or below, I wouldn't give one of these two kids.
Oh yeah, don't let them know about the outside world that doesn't believe their bullshit. Yeah, no, that's a recipe for disaster. That is. Like, that's every cult behavior. Don't allow access to information outside. Don't allow it, because they'll find out. They'll find out stuff that, we don't believe is true. Or the atheists will go, hey, we'll tell you all about religion. You can make up your own mind.
I wouldn't. Not
notice none of the kids are clapping. Yeah.
Today, anyway. In fact, Jonathan Haidt, who's not even a Christian, he teaches at NYU, has come out with some research recently that says this is a disaster, not only for kids, but even for adults. What's our attention span now? 12 seconds? I mean, come on.
Well, I've managed to watch your video in its entirety, Frank, so my attention span isn't doing too badly. And I've got ADHD, so that's actually a pretty baller effort, I think. Yeah.
Blessing and a curse, of course. But if this goes unsupervised, there's just so many lies out there that kids.
And you're assuming they're lies. Heaven forfend that the kid makes their own decision about what is true and what is false. We can't have that. Why not? If it's true, then they should start believing it. Like, that's the thing. Like, why not let people decide what is true for themselves? Why these games and these arguments and these dodges and these, really, really deceptive things that you're doing? Why not just let people find out what's true and what's not? Because Frank's here a biblical inerrant. He believes in the inerrancy of the Bible. So he has to believe that, evolution didn't happen, that there's the world was created in 6 days. Stuff that we know isn't true. Sorry, Frank.
Kids are susceptible to believe in. Now, I couldn't believe this research I'm about to show you when I found it, but if it's even close to being true, this is amazing. A Swiss study from a generation ago figured out that if a father regularly goes to church, the kids will turn out in a certain way, and if he doesn't, they'll turn out in another way. Here's what happens if the father does not regularly go to church. Only 2% of kids from such homes will regularly go to church when they become adults. This is a longitudinal study. That's where they stay with the same group of people throughout time, so it's a really costly study to do. But this Swiss study found that only 2 out of 100 kids from homes where the father didn't regularly go to church would regularly go to church as adults. How about where the father did regularly go to church? About 70% did.
Yeah, so make sure you go to church and don't forget to tithe. Does anybody know the minimum amount in a statistical study to be statistically relevant? Does anybody know the minimum amount? How well do you know your statistical data analysis, people? What is the minimum sample size considered to be statistically significant? Does anybody know? I'll wait. I'll see if anyone's got it. We're talking about populations. 0.66666. Kind of, yeah. It depends what kind of study you're doing, but I'm talking about population studies like this one, like when you take a sample of the population and then sort of make a claim on the population, what the minimum sample size is to be statistically significant. The answer is 300. Well, yes. So 30 data points is when you can actually make some kind of that's when you can make some kind of statistical determination. Basically, when you're essentially saying like you'll give an error margin kind of thing, but anything under 300 is not considered statistically significant for a population kind of thing, right? So it's population only. 300 is where you're supposed to be at. So this sample of 100 people from Switzerland, even though there's a correlation here, sure, absolutely there's a correlation, but is it statistically significant? No. Like, I would love to see the error margins on this, which Frank Turek doesn't give. Because in any statistical analysis, when you do get a p-value, in this case it's the probability that someone will go to church under certain different conditions, you will have an error margin, which is based upon your sample size, and a couple of other factors that will basically sort of, bleed into it, essentially.
Now, this doesn't mean that they're necessarily Christians, but it's probably a decent indicator that they are. Even if this is just close to being true, fathers, you have an outsized impact.
Well, it depends on the population you're doing, Robin. So I don't know the population of trans people in the US. I really don't. But if you're doing that, 2% may be enough, as long as you are taking the sample in groups that are spread out across the entire population. It may be enough if it's over that amount, but it may not be.
On whether or not your kids are ultimately going to become and stay Christians. Don't drop the ball. Now, if you want to go further in the evidence.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah.
We brought some books and DVDs, and I want to
buy my DVDs. Come on, Frank. Did you just buy my DVDs? He sure did.
Point out all the proceeds from the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. Okay, just so you know.
Oh, I bet he loves that joke. Yeah, so you're basically saying that you're going to profit from it. Yeah. Buy my DVDs, Frank. Buy my DVDs.
First of all, before I get to the books and the DVDs, if you follow the Q on that QR code, I'm going to send you this entire PowerPoint presentation. And
yeah, and I think that's about it. No Blu-ray? No. It's DVDs only from Frankie baby. Yeah, and I love the shill at the end. So as much as I dislike sort of Frank Turek's position on certain people, his inordinate hatred of the gay community, his inordinate hatred of the trans community, like the fact that he's giving parents these really bad arguments is kind of comforting in a way, if that makes sense. Like he does it as stand-up, and it's kind of convincing when you're a believer and you're watching it and you're like, yeah, this will make a good argument. But when you actually break the argument down without the spin and the showmanship that Frank Turek puts on it, they're terrible arguments. I mean, if you look at this really pithy, the New Testament didn't create the authors. The authors didn't create the New Testament. The New Testament created the authors. It's a terrible argument. How do you know that? Like, I don't know how you know that. It's so weird. It's such a bad argument, but it sounds good. It's a good soundbite. It's a good, stick it to the atheist. But the problem is when he actually steps into the ring with someone like Alex O'Connor, for instance, he gets demolished. He goes up against Christopher Hitchens. He gets absolutely slaughtered. And so he's making money from going out there and telling parents what they want to hear. Oh, if you bring up these things, you will have your children not leave the faith. Really? You think that's really going to convince anybody? I'm really sorry, but they're terrible arguments. There is no truth. Are kids really saying that? I have my own truth. Yeah, I understand that means you have your own perspective on things. Like, I get that. They're not literally saying that there's my own truth as in there's my own objective reality. No, that's not what they're saying. They're just saying, hey, my perspective differs than yours, and my own perspective says that a God doesn't exist. That's all they're saying. But you want to go, oh no, there's this Jesus truth. We have the truth. I don't, like, seriously. Weird. Love is not approval. Is anybody saying that? I don't, we say you have to tolerate people in society. The reason being is because you're saying, hey, we shouldn't tolerate the minorities like gay people and things like that. You don't have to approve of them, but you have to tolerate them being in society because they're people with their own opinions. They think it's perfectly fine to be gay and have a husband when you're a man and raise a child with that man and, live a long, happy life doing your thing. And you say it's not. Who do we believe? Neither. You can just tolerate one another. That's it. That's all. And the gay community are tolerating you, even though you're being bigoted and horrible towards them. They're not saying you have to stop being a Christian or Christianity is bad for society, so you have to stop. I mean, they would have a point. But all we're saying is, hey, don't be bigoted towards people because you wouldn't like it if, like, what happened to, do unto others as you would have them do unto you? I don't know what happens to that. I really don't. I really don't. So, yeah, no, I think the truth is a bit more complex than that, DeFreak. I think the truth is sort of a state of being where the proposition matches some sort of, it's a state of being where the proposition matches some other thing, basically. It's a comparator. That's all it is. Whether or not, like, even something can be objectively verified and then it can turn out to be untrue. So I think that that's not right. Like, that doesn't mean it's right. The truth is going to be true or false, regardless of whether it's been objectively verified or not, right? So, yeah, it really doesn't. Really doesn't. And what was his third one? I've forgotten the third one. Oh, the Bible is a fairy tale. Yeah, I wouldn't say the Bible is a fairy tale. It's definitely mythology. I get what people are sort of speaking colloquially when they say it's a fairy tale. They mean it has fictional elements in it. And I do not disagree with that. I mean, it's got quite obvious fictional elements in it. The talking donkey, the talking snake, the zombies, the saints that rose out of their graves and paraded around Jerusalem, even though nobody reported it. Like, all of this stuff is obviously fictional. Like, it just obviously is. I'm sorry, it is. And it reads like mythology. I get fairy tale is kind of, we know fairy tales are entirely fictional. There's definitely some real places in there. Jerusalem is a place, Galilee, the Sea of Galilee is the place. All of these things are places, but that doesn't mean all of the elements are real, because some of the elements are true, right? Like, it's regardless of whether the place is true or some of the people are true. Doesn't mean everything's true. It doesn't mean that Joseph of Arimathea definitely existed because Jerusalem is a place. No, that's not a thing. It doesn't work like that. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me, everybody. I will be back. I have a full day today. I am doing another interview with the absolutely amazing and awesome Apostate Sisters, and that will be 11 a.m. tomorrow, I think. I want to say 11 a.m. tomorrow. I think. I'm not 100% sure, though. Yeah, I think so. But it was great. Yeah, no, fantastic. Oh, hey, Jeff. Good to see you, mate. Okay, DeFreak, stop preaching and proselytizing, man. Like, seriously. I don't wear that. I don't. If you want to have a conversation, have a conversation. Don't give me Bible verses, mate. Seriously. But anyway, thank you so much. I don't care. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to each other. Oh, thanks, Jeff. Look, you're liking on faith. Oh, you're liking on faith. That's insane. I respect it. I respect it. But thank you so much. Actually, you've got a lot of evidence that I'm awesome. Let's face it. I'm joking. I'm feeling very tired today, but that's okay. I chided. Oh wow, yeah, nothing like a good chide. But thank you so much, everybody. Take care. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and do all the things, and have a good day, night, whatever suits you. And I will be back very soon with some more interviews, some more. I'm actually appearing on Atheist Edge, which I think I'll get you a thing to, a link. Atheist Edge, which is Kaz, and I haven't seen Kaz for a while, and it should be really good. So I'll be appearing on that very soon. So I'll get you a link. Thank you. Take care, everybody. See you in the next one.
This old switchboard could talk. Wow. Your ears would sizzle. 1880. We take Alexander Graham Bell's invention for granted today. Perhaps we should. But isn't it incredible that millions and millions of people can talk simultaneously to practically any spot on Earth?